Yeah, first off, thanks, Sean, for having me here in this conversation. And this is a very interesting topic indeed, and we have talked about it earlier. And to answer your question on how things are shaping up, have they become better, easier? My take is this: there is a lot of understanding that the industry has developed now about the multi-vendor RAN solutions in general thanks to the various Plugfest kind of interop events. Last edition of ORAN Plugfest was a very expanded event. It happened in multiple locations, and it was in Europe. It was co-branded by TIP, and TIP is a large community by itself, right? And now ORAN and TIP jointly conducted this event. There were many vendors who joined that event, and we could see a broad spectrum of vendors trying to interwork with each other. We went through the presentations for each of the regions, Blackfest event results, right? So the key learnings are there. Definitely, we have learned more about how to integrate, how to make the process easier, less painful. At the same time, we also have seen that it is not a plug and play experience yet, right? And this is going to remain so till the standards and the products reach a level of maturity, or I would say interoperability, and the vendors continue their effort beyond these Plugfest and Interop events. And if you look at it, there are multiple such alliances forming among companies in certain geographies, and there are more operator labs coming in the name of OT labs, right? And there is a joint effort, I would say, continuous effort that's going on. Some of the Plugfest setups which were established in certain OT labs, they continue to operate even today beyond the 6 months beyond the actual event has ended, right? So we need that level of continuous testing and integration and interoperability to get there. So it's still a happening story in my view, and it will take some time for us to reach that level of easier plug and play kind of integration.
You mentioned the work being done with the OTIC labs, and I just was hoping to get a sense of in that sort of long-term effort to make Open RAN a plug-and-play solution. What kind of work is Radisys conducting with its partners in the OTIC lab to kind of get us closer to that plug-and-play type configuration?
Yeah. So let's talk about it in terms of the various interfaces, right? And see, first is the general question about end-to-end interoperability, right from the UE to the RAN network to the core network and the rigs and so on. So we are continuously doing that, engaging with the ecosystem, integrating with different UEs, UE emulator test equipment, core network equipment, and core network equipment from different vendors and core network simulators. This is happening in multiple labs if you look at it, right? And the key integration piece and the top of the mind issue for many people is the front hall integration, because that's seen as the hardest and the most challenging type of interface to integrate with. So there is more work being done by companies like Redisys with various radio partners, and we do various types of integration, both in FR1 and FR2 spectrum, various antenna configurations, and so on. And this again is a learning process and even a feedback process back to the standardization if there are some issues which we think can be subjectively interpreted. We did find one such issue, at least in our experience, in the last interop with an RU emulator, which we interacted with. So there is learning on the front hall interface, definitely. And there is more interest now on the automation part right now. And many of the operators in the forums are pushing towards vendors to reach the next stage. The next stage is seen as the sophistication and the automation from the management plane point of view, getting the configuration, reconfiguration, alarms and KPIs, and in an automated fashion so that you can bring up the system, run the call flows, and so on. So the management interfaces are also being tested with different products, commercial and open source. It could be commercial orchestrators or open source elements. We are doing that. And I would say as a near-term trend, you would have seen some of the product announcements from vendors as well. There is now an immense desire to have the cloudified or virtualized RAN. So you're going to see more of virtualized RAN interops and cloud infrastructure aspects of it. And ORAN in the background, the ORAN standardization is also happening towards this effect. There is a new interface being talked about, which is called the O2 interface, which is the interface between the cloud infrastructure and the RAN network nodes. So that O2 interface will become a focus in the cloud infrastructure, and the way you can run virtualized RAN is another area of interest and interoperability topic, right? And finally, the mid-haul and backhaul, which have not received so much attention, generally thought to be generally okay to expect interoperability. Even there could be more focus in multi-vendor scenario. When I say that the F1 interface interoperability, CU from one vendor and DU from another vendor, organizations like TIP have a special focus on such mid-haul interoperability. And in the backhaul, there is not too much of a variety because it's all standardized interface towards the core network. But there again, we can do some level of interoperability of a cloud hosted core network versus a on-prem kind of core network implementation. And the final piece is about the transport and timing architectures. There are some options and varieties possible. How various transport options and timing architecture can impact the network performance, and that's also being characterized in some of the interop events. So in future events, you will expect all of these things to be surfaced. One item which is slowly happening, which I'm not talking in detail yet, is the rig to RAN network in interoperability. You will see some of the announcements coming soon. Industry efforts. Redis is part of one such effort called SDRAN, software defined RAN. That interoperability, in my view, it's in its early stages because the standards are still emerging for that.
Ganesh, part of our program today is looking at these cases where usually large enterprises that have access to spectrum, they really take a do-it-yourself approach to building out their private networks. So I'm curious, if we put Open RAN into the equation, do you think that it is easy enough for enterprises to consume at this point in time?
We already see early trends, Sean. We have seen some of the organizations do that, and this is based on our own experience in dealing with the ecosystem. Beyond the traditional telco players, which is operators and OEMs, we are seeing enterprises taking this approach. We have had the experience of dealing with such requirements and projects. And there are certain geographies in which I see a trend shaping up already, Europe being a prime example. And for various different use cases. And there are certain partners of Redis with whom we are working to make it easy and digestible for the industrial users. For example, we are looking at a release 15 and release 16 based use cases, both the low latency use case, the ultra reliable low latency use case, and some enhanced mobile broadband EABB kind of use cases. We have identified some three or four such use cases which are applicable on a factory floor or in an automotive scenario, and we're going to demonstrate the readiness of this technology to be consumed by an industry vertical. And efforts like this, more examples like this, will be needed for the industry for them to do most of the things by themselves, without relying too much on ready-made turnkey projects.
So when we think about driving private networking into these particular verticals, manufacturing or ports and logistics, they have very specific sets of needs that they're trying to support as they make these investments. So I'm just kind of curious what you think that might mean for system integrators over time. I know that we've talked a lot about the role of SIs in delivering Open RAN solutions to telecom operators, but when we add that added complexity of the needs of a manufacturer, what does that mean for the SI landscape going forward?
Yeah, so this is going to be an interesting development in future. There is some groundwork being done by organizations like 5G ACIA, the industry initiative towards the connected industry. This is essentially a forum in which many of the European players, the OT players, so-called OT operational technology players, are already specifying their requirements and looking at 5G technology being developed by 3GPP. And there is an interaction with 3GPP through SA6 working group. So there is already requirements being thought about, use cases being thought about, the specific nuances of even going beyond the connectivity, the kind of data transfer that should happen in such cases, and so on. All said and done, beyond standardization, the native knowledge of the system integrator specific to those verticals will definitely be a value add, in some cases a prerequisite. I think the industry is going to adjust itself as a combination of the technology providers who provide the RAN or core network technologies, some of the cloud technology aspects to package it nicely, and some involvement of an SI with some native knowledge in specific cases where it's required, where the operational needs and the operational aspects are a little more complex than a straightforward data transfer, upload, download kind of scenario, right? There's more scrutiny on the data security, more scrutiny on the latency parameters, and so on, and the specific call flows to be addressed. So this is where an SE with vertical knowledge will be very, very essential, is what we think.
Well, Ganesh, I really appreciate you taking the time to share your perspective with our audience as we think about how these network disaggregation trends will impact the way that enterprises consume private networks.
Thank you so much, Sean. It is always a pleasure to talk to you.